Our story begins with Will, a pathetic loser in modern Japan. One day, he died and was taken to an alternate world. Surrounded by 3 demons in an abandoned temple, he feared he was in hell and cried, but soon realized that the demons meant him no harm. They raised Will, and he soon began to understand their language, as he had the mind of a grown man. One day, the demon Mary takes him out of the temple for the first time and reveals to him a pure and beautiful world. Will is moved, thinking that this must be a sign from God for him to start over and live a full life. In addition to Mary, who is a devout mummy priestess and like a mother to Will, there are 2 other demons who also help him grow. One of them is Gus, a sarcastic and stern ghost who was a great magician when he was alive. He teaches Will about mythology and how to cast spells with words of creation. The 3rd demon is Blood, a powerful skeleton warrior who is a father figure to Will, training him to be a good warrior and a good person. Will lives happily with his demon family, who keep many secrets, but he doesn't dare ask. He observes everything while keeping his past life a secret. After years of training, one day Blood and Gus tell Will that he is strong enough to gain combat experience. Gus asks Will to face Blood, who is faster than he looks. Before Will can answer, Blood attacks him. Fortunately, Will dodges in time. Blood chases him, but Will uses his acceleration spell and moves away, creating a puddle that Blood can't avoid. Will slips and falls. Before he can get up, he uses the falling spiderweb spell to try to trap him. But Blood manages to cut the web and disarm Will with a single blow. In addition to training, Mary teaches Will how to deal with everyday problems to ensure that he can survive in any situation. One day, after returning from training, Will sees Mary entering the temple of the Earth Goddess. Since he was not allowed to see her prayers, his curiosity gets the better of him, and he decides to take a peek. Will opens the door and sees Mary completely engulfed in flames. He runs desperately towards her, screaming, and grabs her, trying desperately to pull her out of the flames while crying for help. His own arms begin to burn, and suddenly he passes out. He awakens in his room with the 3 undead around him. Mary begins to cry with joy and curses herself for not paying attention. But Will apologizes for being too curious for his own good. Mary looks at Will and exclaims sadly that all 3 were human before, but that when they died, their intense emotions kept their souls alive. They made a pact with the god of the undead to remain in this world, becoming enemies of matter, the goddess of earth and life. Every time Mary prays to her, she is engulfed in fire, but she has been praying for as long as she can remember. Will asks Mary to let him pray with her to the Earth Goddess, because he wants to know what it feels like to pray. 5 years have passed since the incident, and Will is now 13 years old. He prays to the gods non-stop and can meditate before them for 5 days without rest or food. The lessons with Gus get harder, but he tries to learn everything. Blood also trains him daily. Finally, one day, he tests Will by having him fight an undead demon he has captured. Will is a little anxious, but he easily kills the enemy with a perfect strike. Blood is extremely surprised by this ability, and Will jokingly calls him a genius. Blood thinks for a moment, and then tells Will that he is probably ready for a real experience. He then takes him to an abandoned city and explains that several decades ago, this city was a prosperous area, filled with humans and dwarves everywhere. Now, only undead demons live there. He takes Will to a tunnel, leaves him there and tells him to survive and get out alone. Before Will can say anything, Blood disappears into the darkness. Will feels lost, but creates a light with magic. Soon he finds undead skeletons and destroys them easily. He then comes across an undead skeleton that is bigger and stronger, holding a spear. Will is scared for a moment, but soon he wonders, what would Blood do in this situation? And he realizes that he would never run away from his problems. Will then decides to attack the demon head-on, striking a blow. But the demon manages to dodge and tries to cast a spell against him. Will is surprised, but thanks to his sharp instincts, he manages to nullify the magic and hits the enemy's head. The sword breaks, but the blow defeats the demon. Will picks up the dwarf's magic spear and continues, but soon feels someone behind. Him. It is Gus. Will asks Gus what he is doing there, but he remains silent. A shiver runs through Will's body, and he realizes that something is wrong. This is a lesson. Gus then creates a stone golem that attacks him. Will reacts by stepping back and stabbing the golem, destroying it. Gus attacks by throwing stones, and Will runs, dodging and neutralizing other magical traps. Gus casts several spells at the same time, and Will cannot handle them all. He falls, only to look up and see that Gus is preparing for another attack. Will begins to panic, thinking that he doesn't want to die like this, especially at the hands of someone he considers his beloved teacher. He closes his eyes and decides that if he has to, he will kill Gus. He steps toward him and thrusts his spear, stopping just inches from his body. Will's hands tremble. He drops the spear and tells Gus that he sees him as a grandfather and wants to know why he wants to kill him. Facing Gus, Will declares that he will accept death rather than hurt his family, and cries inconsolably. But Gus cheers up, believing that Will has learned his lesson. He says that he was exceptional. Will is relieved to realize that Gus didn't want to kill him, but he soon realizes that this wasn't just a lesson. Gus is certainly hiding something. Gus escorts him out of the dungeon, and together they return home. There, Will decides to keep what happened between him and Gus a secret, not telling Mary and Blood. Later, Gus teaches Will how to evaluate his spear, which can emit light on command, and can also shorten or expand thanks to the magic spells engraved on it. Will begins to frequently visit the tunnels of the abandoned city, where he can now fight all the monsters with ease and collects pieces of armor whenever possible. Gus also reduces his workload to almost nothing, as he believes that Will has already learned more than enough. One day, Gus calls Will to his quarters at night and tells him that before he turns 15, Blood will probably challenge him to a serious duel. And Gus wants him to lose this duel in a way that Blood does not realize it was intentional. Will is completely shocked and asks Gus why he wants this to happen, but Gus only replies that it is a secret that he cannot reveal. Will is irritated by Gus's habit of keeping secrets and clearly tells him that if he cannot explain why, Will not help him. Will spends the next 2 months training his body to its limits until the day of the duel finally arrives. Blood is waiting for him, and the duel begins. As they both draw their swords, Blood attacks Will with quick, powerful blows, which he only tries to block. Will is knocked back, but he rushes towards Blood, deflects his sword to gain momentum, jumps and stabs him in the chest. Blood falls back, surprised by the unexpected attack, but then throws Will away and plunges his sword between his ribs. Blood forces Will to accept defeat, pointing another sword at him. Mary runs to Will, asking if he is okay, and yells at Blood for promising not to plunge swords into his opponents again. After the lecture, the three sit down, and Blood tells Will that he did very well even if he did not defeat him. Will thanks Mary and Blood, calling them father and mother, and they are happy. UD says he has no special technique to teach, but gives him the purple sword, one of the strongest demonic blades. Will says he didn't win the fight, but Blood replies that it is a symbol of his independence. He explains that it is the devouring demonic sword, feared even by the gods. In addition to being powerful, it has a lifesteal bonus, allowing Will to heal himself when he injures an enemy. However, it also has disadvantages. The more you use it, the more dependent you become, hindering your own growth. Will realizes the powers and complications of using the sword and promises to be careful. So Blood and Mary decide to tell him the secrets they kept from him, starting the story from the beginning. Long ago, all the demon lords united to conquer the world, led by an extremely vile and ruthless man. Aken was a demon who created demonic soldiers and generals from his own blood and flesh. He had the devouring sword and would injure himself to create an army, then kill to heal himself. With these skills, he conquered the continent, starting with the nearby destroyed city. When the continent nearly fell into the hands of the High King, Gus, the legendary wandering magician, planned to defeat him with the help of the legendary warrior Blood and the priestess Mary. He planned to infiltrate the High King's city and steal his demon blade to greatly weaken him and then kill him. But the plan failed, because by the time they reached the High King, he had transformed into a giant demon, and was such an incredible swordsman that not even Blood could touch him. Gus and Mary managed to seal him and somehow imprison the High King. However, Stagnate, the god of the undead, decided to intervene. He promised to eradicate the demons from the continent if they would become his servants. Without hesitation, the three accepted the sacrifice. Blood became a skeleton, Gus a ghost, and Mary a mummy. The god kept his word and eliminated the demons, but instead of killing them, he turned them all into undead, leading the world to stagnation. According to Blood, the three are the highest-ranking undead, guarding the seal for over 200 years. One day, demons brought a human baby to the temple to sacrifice it to a dark god and break the seal of the High King, but Blood killed them. Gus wanted to abandon the baby in the forest, but Mary and Blood disagreed and decided to raise him as their own, saying they would always love him. Blood proudly says he was the best student. Will is confused. It seems like a farewell. Suddenly, dark clouds appear. Mary and Stagnate appear, demanding the souls of Blood and Mary, saying they have neglected their duties. Will feels helpless and falls before the clone of the evil god named Echo. However, the ground splits, and Gus arrives in style. Before the god can react, he tells Will to take Mary and Blood while he faces Stagnate. Will considers Gus majestic for facing a god and binding him with multiple spells at once. Stagnate is unable to defeat him, and Gus's spells defeat him, sending him back to his kingdom. Gus approaches Will and tells him that it's okay, that he can relax. Will is shaken, but happy that everyone is safe. Before he can speak, Gus makes a terrible sound and splits in half. Blood and Mary also fall, and Will is horrified to see Stagnate appear behind them, mocking Gus for thinking he could defeat a god. Stagnate easily throws Gus away and goes to Will, telling him that the three undead were his supreme soldiers, and that when they stop guarding the High King's seal, he will consume their souls. Thanks to Will, their vigil has been shattered, and he can now take Mary and Blood, even though Gus insists on keeping the seal. Will kneels upon hearing this, and Stagnate offers him the chance to join his army and live happily with his family. However, he gives him until the next day to decide, and then disappears. Will is devastated and takes the three undead inside. He understands that Gus tried everything to keep his friends in duty and protect their souls, but he failed. Gus did not want to blame his student for this. Will blames himself for living selfishly and leading them to this fate, and begins to cry. He feels that he disappointed his parents in his past life, and that he is still the cause of their unhappiness. Will falls asleep crying, and the next morning finds the three undead trying to act as if nothing had happened, so that he will not blame himself. He then reveals the truth about his reincarnation, and says that he will always be worthless trash. Mary doesn't like it and slaps him, telling him to stop talking bad about himself. She talks sense into him, and he stands up, declaring that he will protect everyone. He goes to the temple and prays to the gods before facing Stagnate, who was waiting for his answer. Will faces Stagnate and says that he will not make any pact with him, and that he will defeat him at any cost. Stagnate is amused and uses magic to create undead demons, ordering them to attack Will. The demons surround him, but he destroys many. With his spear, uses spells to bind some and uses acceleration magic to attack the next ones, surprising the evil god. There are still many demons, and Will gets injured fighting bravely. Stagnate stops the attacks and says that Will is impressive, inviting him again to be a general in his army and live happily with his family, saying that he has united them to this family forever. Will looks confused. Then Stagnate pours blood into a cup and offers it to him, surprising everyone. Will walks towards the evil god looking at the cup, but suddenly takes the blade of the devouring demon and cuts off Stagnate's arm. Magical spikes emerge from the blade, trapping the god. Will slashes again, and his wounds begin to heal. However, before he can deliver the final blow, his legs are suddenly caught by a snake that sneaks up behind him and bites him. Will tries to get up but ends up falling unconscious. He then awakens in an extremely calm and serene celestial realm that seems strangely familiar to him, but he can't remember anything about it at that moment. He turns around and sees a beautiful woman walking toward him. He suddenly realizes that she is the goddess of light and rebirth, Gracefeel, and that she accompanied him to this world when he was reincarnated. The goddess asks him why he refused Stagnate's invitation. Will replies that his previous life was regrettable, and he doesn't want that to happen again. He wants to live well in this world, and without death, life would lose its meaning. Furthermore, he wants to protect his family. Gracefeel is impressed by his answer, and pleased, grants him her grace. She tells him to wake up, swear an oath, and walk by her side forever. Will awakens on the battlefield, removes the snake, and falls to his knees in prayer, swearing to God and Gracefield. Stagnate laughs, saying it is useless, but when he sees Will's body in blue flames, he realizes that he has been blessed by the goddess of light and rebirth, and panics. Will draws his sword and vows to dedicate his life to the goddess, to banish evil and alleviate suffering. Stagnate orders his forces to kill the boy, but Will uses the divine torch to send them to the afterlife. He charges at Stagnate with a haste spell, but Stagnate leaps away and disappears with a dust spell. Will is on alert, but Gracefield signals that he is no longer there. He has returned to the temple to attack Blood and Mary. Will quickly uses his acceleration spell and rushes to the temple, hoping to make it in time and use the grace of his guardian goddess to bring his family back into the cycle of rebirth. He enters and sees Gus holding Blood and protecting Mary from Stagnate. Will rushes to help, but the god is too close, and he knows he won't make it in time. But a bright light appears and repels Stagnate. Mater, the earth goddess, appears to protect Mary, her beloved follower, now forgiven. This is what Will needed. So he uses the divine torch on Mary and Blood, certain that Stagnate will try to prevent them from being sent into the cycle of rebirth. Stagnate counters the divine attack with his own attack, and Blood takes the opportunity to attack him from behind. Stagnate manages to dodge, but before he can fully recover, Will speeds towards him. Stagnate tries to cast his magic, but Gus immediately counters it. Will then stabs the god and pushes him against the wall. There, he unleashes a barrage of attacks using the demon blade along with the grace of Gracefield, eliminating Stagnate once and for all. He falls to the ground exhausted, and the three run to him, asking if he is okay. Gus congratulates him, saying that he has gotten stronger. Everyone is happy with his achievement, and Gus says that they will celebrate tonight. Mary and Blood try to get up and leave, but suddenly fall. Will asks if something is wrong, but they already seem to know what is happening. They tell him that since Stagnate died and they broke the contract with him, now they will die. Will is surprised to hear this and says that there must be another way to resolve the situation. But they respond that they will finally be able to return to the cycle of rebirth and that he should not be sad about it. Will begins to cry as he does not want them to abandon him, but his parents tell him not to be so selfish. They tell him that his future may not be easy, but that he must strive to be happy despite the challenges. Slowly, the spirits leave their bodies, and Will sees what they were like in life. Gus brings out some vintage alcohol, and everyone celebrates Will's coming of age before Blood and Mary die peacefully. Will praises them as Gracefield guides their souls to rebirth. The next day, he buries the bodies on top of a hill, saying that he will soon leave on a journey, but that he will always return to see them. Gus approaches from behind, and Will asks why he is still alive. Gus explains that, since he has not completely broken his contract with Stagnate, he still has about 10 years to live. During that time, he will protect the High King's seal until Will is ready to act. He tosses Will a sack full of treasures and tells him to spend it however he wants, since it will no longer be of any use to him. Will thanks him, knowing he will need it on his journey. He returns to his room, gets dressed, packs his backpack, and leaves the temple. Gus accompanies him to the end of the road and says goodbye. Before leaving, he tells Will that he will need a surname and calls him Will, of Maryblood, in honor of his undead family. Will begins his journey through forests, eliminating demons, and consuming the food he brought. With no sign of humans, he finally finds a settlement and is encouraged, but soon realizes that it is a deserted city. He heads to the river and prays for Gracefield to return lost souls to the cycle of life. The next day, he walks through the jungle following the course of the river, hoping to find signs of humans. Suddenly, a boar appears and tries to attack him. Will is quick and knocks it down with one blow, but sees that the boar had already been shot with an arrow, a sign that there is someone else nearby. The man who shot the arrow appears and points his bow at Will. Reflecting on how to avoid a fight, Will realizes that the archer is an elf and greets him in ancient Elvish. The archer, surprised, lowers his weapon, introduces himself as Meneldor, and says that the boar should be his prey. However, he agrees to share the meat since Will killed it. They prepare and cook the boar together. Before eating, Will prays to the gods. Menel smiles, seeming not to believe it. After the meal, Will asks for directions, claiming to be an adventurer lost in the ruins to the south. Menel mentions a city downriver, and Will thanks him. However, when he asks to accompany him, Menel refuses and warns him not to follow him under any circumstances. He then uses magic to summon fairies who light the way for Will and disappears into the forest. Night falls and Will sets up camp, lights a fire and eats dinner. While sleeping, Gracefield appears in his dream showing Menel and his village under attack. Will wakes up startled and runs to warn him of the impending danger. He arrives at a village where he sees some humans walking around, but nothing seems to have happened yet. Suddenly, the attack begins. Will runs to protect the villagers from the arrows, but soon realizes that Menel is not in danger. He is the danger. Menel fires more arrows, but Will blocks them. The guards alert the village, forcing Menel and his group to retreat. Will advances. Menel uses fairy magic to trip and burn him, but Will resists and uses his brute strength. He runs towards Menel and knocks him down with a blow to the stomach. He then captures the rest of the criminals using his web magic. The villagers arrive and begin to argue. One of them thanks Will for saving the village and explains that the area is known as the Forest of Beasts, inhabited by outlaws. The attackers came from a neighboring village, and no one understands why, since the conditions there were good. The village chief thanks Will and promises to ask for help again if necessary. He then interrogates the invaders. At dawn, he discovers that Menel's village has been destroyed by demons, who have taken everything. They attack to survive. Menel takes the blame and asks to be the only one punished. The chief orders his execution, despite sympathizing with him. Will intervenes, offers to make up for his crimes with Gus's money, and says that his goddess guides him to be kind and give them a chance at redemption. The chief agrees. The criminals are released, and the survivors of the other village, who did not participate in the attack, are given shelter. Will then hires Menel to guide him to the demons that destroyed his village. He wants to defeat them, as that is his mission as a devotee of Gracefield. Menel calls him naive, but thanks him nonetheless. With Menel's tracking skills and the magic of the fairies, Will soon arrives at a ruined village shrouded in mist. Menel searches the village and finds the demons performing a ritual in the temple. Will thinks the enemies are no big deal. He enters the temple, kills a demon conducting the ritual, traps a manticore in his magical web, and kills the other demon. He then eliminates the manticore while Menel joins the fight and defeats the guards outside, realizing that they are not strong enough. After the battle, they search the village for survivors and pray for the dead. Will asks Gracefield to guide them in the next life. Menel thanks him and apologizes for having judged him as a rich and arrogant brat, excited by his blessings. He then takes Will to his adoptive grandmother, now a powerful ghost of high rank. Will fears that she will be a difficult opponent, but she is in complete control of herself and does not intend to resist. Upon realizing this, Menel breaks down, revealing that he was frustrated at not being able to help the villagers. He argues with his grandmother's ghost in a somewhat chaotic manner, as if he were a neighbor on LSD. Menel feels pathetic and has no will to live, but his grandmother cheers him up, telling him that he has a new chance with his priest friend. She tells Will about a demon hideout in the forest and then leaves alone, happy as a fulfilled grandmother, while he remains silent. Later, the villagers return to find their homes destroyed. Menel takes Will to a quiet place and tells him about his past. His mother loved humans and had a half-breed son with one of them. After her death, Menel ran away, as he was mistreated by the villagers. He became an adventurer, but was betrayed by a colleague and arrived in that village, where he met a woman who guided him to the right path. However, as an elf, he did not age like humans, and while she became a grandmother, he remained a teenager, which left him lonely. Menel then switches to business mode and asks Will to bless him as a priest of Gracefield and make him a devotee. Will is surprised by the abrupt transition from an emotional story to business, but blesses him. Afterwards, they return to the villagers' party. The village's restoration begins the next day, but the villagers must travel to the City of White, sail to get supplies. Will wants to know more about it, and Menel is surprised by his lack of knowledge. White Sail is the largest city south of the Fertile Kingdom, famous since the war between human heroes and the High King 200 years ago. Will is excited to visit the city, but first plans to explore ruins to raise funds and help with the reconstruction. He and Manel return from a successful mission and see two people being chased by a brute, Haran's cousin. Will protects them and faces the enemy, remembering Blood's advice about intimidating beasts before fighting. His deadly gaze works, and Haran's cousin flees. The saved girl is moved by Will's heroic act and introduces herself as Robina, a traveling Barrow Hlin. Her companion is Antonio, a merchant. Manel introduces himself to Will and learns that the pair intended to go to White Sail, but their guards fled when they saw the gorilla. Seizing the opportunity, Will offers to escort them to White Sail in exchange for help getting discounts on supplies. Robina and Antonio are excited to be traveling with a warrior priest. Along the way, they pass through villages where Robina draws crowds with her singing, and Antonio opens his shop. He even asks Will to heal people, spread the name of Gracefield, and thus attract customers. One night, resting in an empty shed, Robina sings a song about Blood, Mary, and Gus. Will is eager to hear the immortal story of his family. Years before they were famous heroes, the trio saved a half-elf chosen as a sacrifice for a worm that was attacking their village. Her boyfriend offered all his money to fight the creature. They accepted the mission, defeated the worm, and gave the couple a dagger and some money to start over. Hesitantly accepting, the wise Gus said it was an investment, hoping that they would become famous and rich, and that one day he would return to collect on the promised spells. Gus used a false name and left. The song ends, but the story does not. Robina tells Will that Count Dagger's family has an old half-elf woman waiting for someone to return the loan from the wandering sage. Will is moved and cries happily, wanting to meet the woman. The next morning, they have breakfast and leave for White Sail. Upon arriving, Will is amazed by the magnificent city. Antonio explains that it is ruled by the Crown Prince Isle and that it is known for its smart economic policies, fashionable perfumes, magical streetlights, and public toilets operated by wizards. After a sauna and a cold shower, Will and the group eat at a restaurant and visit the Great Temple, where Will intends to pay homage to Gracefield. He enters alone, admires the beauty of the place, and informs a junior priest of his intentions. The priest explains that since Gracefield is a minor deity, there are few priests, and they need to verify that Will is not an impostor in the service of evil gods. He asks Will to cooperate until they can say a prayer of faith detection, warning that all the high-ranking priests are away on missions. Will understands and is about to leave when Bart, the bishop of the temple, shows up. He intimidates the junior priest with his rude manner and foul mouth, but is impressed by Will's knowledge and lessons, and allows him to pay his respects to Gracefield without the need for a check. The junior priest takes Will to the chapel and, on the way, complains about Bishop Bart, calling him vain and immoral. When Will returns to the church guest house, his friends also speak ill of Bart, saying that he is a vulgar old man who uses bribery and intimidation. Suddenly, the bell rings loudly. Will sees a wyvern attacking the city and causing chaos. The church is filled with wounded and everyone is nervous. Will runs to the roof to help and sees the city in flames, with soldiers fighting the wyvern with catapults. But the creature is fast and strong, easily destroying the defenses. Seeing all this, Will feels that his adoptive parents' efforts to bring peace are being destroyed. In his anger, he tries to attack the wyvern with lightning, but misses. As he prepares to attack again, Manel appears and reprimands him, asking him to use his head and think of a solution. Will calms down, goes back to basics, and formulates a plan. He asks Manel to channel fairy magic to support him with a long-range wind spell, which he combines with his own spell, an electrified spiderweb. They launch the attack together, trapping the wyvern. However, the creature breaks free without taking any damage, but becomes more aggressive and advances to attack. Will calls upon the grace of his goddess and erects a gigantic magical barrier around the temple. The barrier blocks the wyvern's fire, but breaks when it attacks with its claws wrapped in a horrible miasma. Will then uses wind magic to knock the creature down and binds it with magical chains. The monster breaks the chains, but Will charges forward and stabs it. The wyvern still survives and threatens to attack everyone in the temple. Desperate, Will remembers Blood's advice. If all else fails, use brute force. He leaps onto the wyvern's neck and strangles it with all his strength, breaking its neck and knocking it to the ground. As he stands up, he notices that everyone in the temple is watching him in silence, perplexed. However, Antonio and Robina take the initiative and proclaim him a hero, the Wyvern Slayer. The people begin to cheer for him. Afterwards, as Will helps to remove the rubble, a priest approaches and informs him that the prince has summoned him. He and Menel visit Prince Isle, who wants to talk about the group that defeated the Wyvern. The prince believes that the roles of warrior, wizard, fairy magic user, and priest are divided among the 4 members of the group. But Will explains that he himself performs 3 of these roles, and Menel is the fairy user. Surprised, the prince becomes serious and demands more details. Will loses what little confidence he had, but Isle thanks him for the victory and asks him to choose a reward. Will asks for help in subduing the demons in the south, but the prince says that this is impossible, as the area is remote and he cannot send troops. So Will makes a bold request. He wants to assemble and finance his own army of mercenaries. The request is audacious, and the prince says that he could have him killed for overstepping his bounds. Will looks around, wonders if he could face him right there, but decides to be honest. He says that, as a priest of Gracefield, it is his duty to save those who suffer. The prince is impressed by his determination. Suddenly, Bishop Bart enters and accuses Isle of trying to overstep the temple's authority by summoning a priest without approval. However, Bart is shocked to learn that Will only asked for permission to form a private army to liberate the villages of Beastwood. Isle then announces that she intends to appoint Will as a paladin and wishes to share his guard with the temple. Bart is surprised by the proposal and leaves with Will to reflect. On the way, Menel argues with the bishop, while Will tries to convince Anna, Bart's adopted daughter. She reassures him, saying that, although her father seems like a jerk, he has a good heart. Will later meets Bart at the temple and discovers that he avoids using divine grace because he has to commit immoral acts to develop the land. In order not to tarnish his goddess, he resorts to bribery and intimidation. Will comes to respect him for this moral sacrifice. Bart tries to convince Will to give up saving the Beastwood forest, but he insists on fulfilling his oath. Bart is surprised by such devotion and allows him to continue. Will then goes to a pub in search of glory seekers, hoping to recruit adventurers willing to fight for less money and more fame. His reputation as a wyvern slayer attracts many, but they are disappointed by the quest's low rewards. However, a veteran named Rav understands Will's intentions. He wants people willing to risk everything and fight to the end. The man, who has lost comrades to pride before, is surprised to learn that Will wants to defeat the demons in the south, but finds it amusing and decides to join the quest with his group. Will is later knighted by the prince, officially becoming a paladin. He swears fealty to the gods and promises to protect the weak. He then sets out with his ragtag team of adventurers and receives help from Antonio to finance the development of the villages. Bard also sends priests, including Anna, to support him. In the months that follow, Will and his companions explore the forest, slay demons, mediate local disputes, and bring prosperity to the villages. One day, Rav reports that some scouts have not returned for a long time, and Will decides to search for them. He sets out with Menel, Rav, and their group, and eventually find the bodies of the scouts, as well as the footprints of a giant demon. However, they follow the clues of a man who apparently fled to the bottom of the valley, only to realize that they have fallen into a trap. They are surrounded by demonic beasts. Everyone takes up position to fight. Will and Menel strengthen the adventurers with their powers. The battle begins against the horde of beasts. While keeping the monsters at bay, a giant monster appears behind them, high on a cliff. Menel identifies it as a chimera, a creature with multiple demonic parents. Menel tries to attack it with earth magic, but is hit with a powerful slap and suffers serious injuries. The chimera uses black fire and burns him. Desperate, Will tries to save him with lightning magic, but is interrupted by a demonic serpent that strikes him. The spell is interrupted, and Will ends up injured by his own magic. Falling to his knees and overcome by rage, he cuts the snake with his demonic sword, the Overeater. Consumed by rage, Will fights without defending himself, killing the beasts, while the Overeater heals him continuously. He destroys all the monsters until Rav pulls him away, asking him to save Manel, who is still alive. Will runs, in tears, trying to heal his friend's burned body, but ends up fainting. Will wakes up in the village and Rav informs him that the Chimera has escaped, forcing the group to retreat. Manel is alive but in a coma, and King Stav forbids Will from visiting him until he gets better. During his recovery, Will reflects on where he went wrong. He walks through the rain to Manel's room and realizes that, because he is too strong, he overestimated others. When he heals him, he realizes that he was looking for friends like his adoptive parents, people like him, and impose this ideal on Manel, almost killing him. He then decides that he will no longer depend on anyone. He will save everyone, on his own. However, as soon as Will leaves the room, Manel wakes up and realizes that his friend was there. He follows him into the forest and confronts him. Will declares that he will defeat the demons alone, without anyone's help. Manel, furious, attacks him, but cannot even make him move. Then he pretends to stop and suddenly throws rocks at himself, using fairy magic, forcing Will to protect him with his own body. Will falls to his knees, and Manel kicks him in the stomach, calling him a coward. Manel, moved, states that as a friend it is his duty to stop him from doing something stupid. He apologizes and helps him get up, promising that he will soon be strong enough to not be a burden. After this reconciliation, they return to the village and begin preparations for a new battle against the Chimera. This time, Will and his team are better organized. The group heads to the valley, facing the beasts with flaming arrows, shields, and spears. After defeating them, Will and Manel arrive at an abandoned monastery before the others. They feel that the place is safe, but Will senses something strange. He uses nullification magic and reveals the Chimera, which was invisible. They discover that the Chimera is an intelligent monster, created by demonic rituals to keep the South devastated and prevent the arrival of humans. The demons' plan is to conquer the city of the dead without resistance and free their supreme king. The Chimera attacks Will by surprise, but he dodges it and stabs it in the head. She charges forward, but he blocks it with a magical barrier, and attacks her from the side, while Manel holds her down. The two attack in tandem, uncoordinating the creature's heads. Will stabs from one side, and Manel uses wind magic to propel his arrow and blow off the monster's tail. Will then takes out one of the Chimera's heads. The creature then releases its ultimate technique, a dark miasma, while growing in size. Will instructs Manel to support him from a distance, as he will face the Chimera alone on the front lines, since he is immune to the poison. Approaching, Will crushes the black flame that comes out of the Chimera's mouth with his shield. Manel propels it away with magic, and Will stabs it from below, then leaps to deliver the final blow to the last remaining head. With the Chimera defeated, Will and Manel prepare to face the final boss inside the monastery. Upon entering, they discover that Rav has arrived first and has already killed the chief demon while they were fighting the Chimera. They return to the village, which is now more lively. Manel informs Will that more people are coming, since the danger of the beasts has been eliminated. And then he says that Will can become the new lord of Beast Woods. Will is confused, but Manel calls him an idiot and explains he has divine protection, the support of the prince and the church, and the respect of the people. So of course he will be the new lord. Will panics when he realizes this, but soon recovers and decides that he can take on this role with the help of his friends. He dreams of reviving the city of the dead and visiting his parents' graves. Soon, Will becomes the lord of the lands of Beast Woods. 2 years pass, and he has already developed the region quite a bit. Now a dashing 17-year-old, Will resides in the capital of Torchport, called Lightport, established in the first abandoned town he came across after leaving home. One day, while sorting through papers, he patents the manufacturing process. Manel enters his office, and during a walk through the city, Will shares that he believes the future lies in paper. Instead of cutting down trees and selling wood, he plans to create a paper industry in Beast Woods. This will ensure long-term profits for his territory. As winter approaches, Will takes Robina to a meeting with friends. She asks him to take her to the Academy of Mages, as she has always wanted to meet her. It is a forbidden land, where not even non-mages are allowed to enter. But Will, friendly with Hlyn, accepts the request. Robina believes that despite the risks, a mage like Will be able to enter easily. When they reach the forest surrounding the academy, Will discovers magical protections and traps. He gives up trying to sneak in and, so as not to disappoint Robina, suggests they go to the front door and ask for permission. This, however, is easier said than done, as magic confuses strangers in the forest. After walking in circles, Will realizes the trick and uses magic to reveal the correct path. He sees a sign on a tree saying, "Learn or be gone," and wonders what it means. Robina becomes anxious upon reading the message and says they should not push their luck. She has heard that even the legendary wandering sage needed his master's help to enter the academy when he was young. Will hears this for the first time and decides to continue. They advance until they come across a disheveled old man near a campfire. Will and Robina introduce themselves, and the old man says he is just the humble caretaker of the academy, whose name is not worthy of being given to the paladin. He invites the two to rest a bit and explains that only wizards are allowed into the academy, but he still hopes they can be allowed in for a while. The old man offers them some cheese to roast and eat. While they eat, he asks Will to demonstrate some magic, curious about the abilities of the famous FARAWAY paladin. Will responds that, according to his master's teachings, he should not use magic just for show or sport. The old man tries to be clever and asks him to dry wet firewood, since the snow from the previous night had soaked all the available wood. Will, being even cleverer, simply dries the wood around the already lit fire. The old caretaker is impressed by the solution and begins to interview the two candidates. Robina states that she believes that magic should be used to create happiness for all, and that she has always seen Will use it for that purpose. This impresses the old man, who decides that they are worthy of seeing the academy. A bright light appears behind him. Will shields his eyes, and when the light dims, they are already at the academy gates. Suddenly the old man appears, well-dressed, and introduces himself as Professor Han, Master of the Wood. He allows Will and Robina to enter the academy and asks Helene what she wants to see. They take a tour of the academy and go to the library, which was Robina's wish. She thanks Han, who gives them permission to read anything on that floor. Robina searches for a specific book and soon finds 2 heavy volumes, which Will has to carry. Reading the titles, she discovers that one is a list of academy graduates and the other is a historical record of the area. Robina researches carefully until nightfall and leaves with Will, after thanking Han. On the way back, Will asks her why she was so interested in those books. Robina tells her that she traveled with a beautiful and kind mage, with whom she had the best times, but they ended up parting ways because they had different destinies. Later, Robina learns that her magical friend died heroically while protecting a town from demons, but no story survives of this deed. She wants to learn more about her friend's actions and compose a song so that she will never be forgotten. Robina ends her memoir happily, saying that heroes' songs bring hope, and that she will write one for her friend. Will asks her to sing it to him when she is finished, hoping that even if she dies, her songs will live on. Months pass, and the seasons change. One day, Will receives a report that winter flowers are blooming in the summer, an anomaly that the prince takes seriously and sends Will to investigate. He goes into the forest with Manel and finds dead animals. Manel says that the forest has gone mad, but Will thinks he is simply gassing the forest. Still, he takes the warning seriously, and they set out to investigate the problem. Manel explains that 2 ancient trees rule the forests of the Beastwoods. The Lord of Oak rules the winters, and the Lord of Holly rules the summers, switching roles at the solstice. On the most recent summer solstice, Oak still holds the authority, as Holly does not heed the call and refuses to take up his post. Manel knows that if the rulers do not align with the season, the forest is in danger. To save it, he offers himself as a messenger and asks Oak to transfer the authority to Holly manually. Oak warns him that he cannot endure the process and that his soul will be destroyed within a month. Still, Manel accepts the risk, saying that he will deal with Will. Manel expresses his deep connection to the forest and says that he does not want it to perish. The oak tree accepts his feelings and sends him to a test of valor. Will must step aside as he cannot interfere in the forest's affairs and waits patiently for his friend to return, meditating. A few days later, Manel returns a little more hardened and shows Will the mark of royal authority on his hand. Soon, the two march towards the holly tree and encounter two demons along the way. They easily defeat one each and realize that they were only guardians. The chief was in charge. They pass through a giant stone gate and find a huge tree, surrounded by a terrifying mist. Menel tells them that it is the Lord of Holly, who rules the forest in the summer. As they approach, they find a demon general waiting. He says that he has heard of the Paladin and Meneldor of the Swift Wings, and that he will gain glory by hunting them. He then summons his demonic beasts to attack. When they are surrounded, Menel contacts Holly and transfers royal authority. The tree takes over the power of the forest and uses its roots to pin the beast to the ground. The demon general is furious that his plan has failed, but he has bigger concerns. Will steps in to attack him. The demon chants a spell, but Will interrupts him, causing the spell to backfire. The blast hits the demon himself. Will then lunges forward with his spear, which is blocked by a halberd. Even so, he overpowers the enemy with force and cuts him down, forcing him to his knees. Then he stabs him in the head. The Lord of Holly is grateful for being saved and uses his power to restore the forest. The trees grow new leaves and the lakes fill up, something that, Will thinks, would be effective in combating global warming. Holly then tells Menel that by temporarily assuming the authority of ruler, his fairy blood has awakened. One day, he will be the new lord of the forest and will become an old bearded tree like him. Menel and Will are surprised that they did not know this, or read the terms of the contract. Holly states that this will not happen immediately, and that Menel may refuse, but asks him to think about it. Holly warns that in the Rust Mountains to the west, the Black Calamity fire will begin to consume the land. He describes the mountains as a nest of demons, home to the Lord of Hellfire, a miasma that sleeps amidst other men's treasures. He warns the Paladin to prepare himself and ends his message. Will and Menel then visit Prince Isle, who tries to please Will for the success of the mission. Menel, suspicious, does not like the prince's way of reducing rewards with sweet words and speaks frankly in order to obtain more. At that moment, Bishop Bart arrives out of breath. The four sit down, and Will and Menel report what they found in the forest, warning of the Lord of Holly. The prince fears facing successive calamities. Menel and the bishop discuss whether the prophecy of an old tree is reliable, but decide to put it aside and focus on the main problem. Bart reveals that the Rust Mountains were, in fact, the ancient capital of the dwarves, now dominated by demons. Will is excited, thinking that, with no one around, he can do whatever he wants there. The prince smiles, pleased with the paladin's willingness. But Bart remains skeptical. Even so, the prince entrusts Will with the mission, to obtain information about the Rust Mountains. Will and Menel find Robina to hear her stories. She tells them that, 200 years ago, the place was known as the Iron Mountains, and was the capital of the powerful Iron Kingdom of the dwarves. When the demon army invaded, the dwarves fought bravely, but almost all of them died. The mountains turned red with blood, and the iron rusted. The survivors who left also faced hardships, and few remained alive. Robina concludes that no songs or stories from that time have survived. Will decides to talk to the dwarves at Torchport. Menel guides him through a forest path, and now, with the temporary authority he has, he says that he may have to decide his future in the centuries to come, when Will will be dead. Menel plans to observe Will's great-grandchildren. He explains that hybrids between Fae and human must make a crucial decision. They can choose to be mortal and die of old age, or become immortal and become one with nature. Menel wants to see all of Will's achievements before making that decision. With the half-elf's new powers, they reduce a journey of days to a few hours and arrive at Torchport. In the city, they meet Antonio and ask about the immigrant dwarves who arrived 6 months ago. At the time, they were lost and seemed dead inside. Many were against letting them in. But now they are well settled, and their leader may have information about the Rust Mountains. Will remembers what Gus taught him. Creatures known as Fae can be lords of the forests, or choose mortal bodies to live among humans. Those who followed the goddess of wind and forest became elves. Those who worshipped the god of fire and art became dwarves, master craftsmen and brave warriors, respected even by their blood. The next morning, While Will is training with Menel, he notices someone watching them. He goes to greet them and, contrary to what he had heard about dwarves, finds a nervous and cowardly dwarf who runs away when Menel speaks rudely. Later, Will visits the dwarven settlement in the city and sees everyone hard at work. Upon seeing their lord, the dwarves stop and bow to him. Will goes to meet the leader, Agnar, and his uncle Grendr, who is very old. They sit down to drink tea, and Will asks why they have come to the Beast Woods. Grendr coldly replies, "We have come to die." Will chokes on his tea at this frank and morbid answer. Agnar then takes over the conversation and explains that his uncle is one of the last of the old Iron Mountain. Grendr is moved as he remembers his homeland and how he dreamed of reclaiming it, but is now too old to act. He only wants to ensure peace for the young, and asks Will to look after them. Will takes his hands and promises to protect them, keeping them safe and happy. Grendr cries, "Thanks, Will," and begins to tell the story of the Iron Mountains. 200 years ago, the dwarves had a king, a great warrior and scholar. Under his rule, they achieved peace and prosperity. But he would be remembered as the last king of the Iron Kingdom. The High King of the Demons and his servants arrived in the mountains and sent a messenger asking for an alliance. The king beheaded the messenger, making it clear that he would never join the demons. But the emissary had left a warning. The evil dragon would come and destroy everything. The king then prepared his warriors for war. He knew that whoever stayed would die, but he did not force anyone. He was determined to face the demons and the dragon, even if it cost everyone their lives. The dwarves were too proud to back down in the face of such a great battle. The king ordered all those who were not skilled in fighting to leave the country, swallow their pride, and survive, so that one day they could return and defeat their enemies. Grendr ends his story crying with shame and guilt. He was a novice guard and could not fight alongside his king, so he led the civilians to safety. Many have died on the treacherous roads, and he is consumed by the guilt of having survived. He is losing everyone he loves. Will is moved to tears when he hears her story. When he returns from the dwarf's house, he discovers a fight between two drunks at an inn. The dwarf Snowflake, whom he saw spying, tries to stop the drunks, but is knocked unconscious. Will intervenes before they do anything worse, and the men flee in terror, leaving all their money behind. The dwarf wakes up irritated when Will asks his name. He answers that his name is Rooks, and Will praises his resilience. Will then asks the innkeeper about the previous fight. She explains that her father used to be the owner, but is ill, and now she has to take over the job, which has been difficult, especially when dealing with fights. Will offers to heal her father and tells her that dinner that night will be on the house. Rooks accepts the offer. As they leave, they notice that Rue has already fixed the broken door. Everyone is impressed by his skill, but he himself is not. Confident, Will and Rue have dinner together and have a conversation. The dwarf reveals that he has always been a great admirer of Will. He tells Will that he is the prince of the dwarves, and that he was raised as a sheltered child, which resulted in his lack of confidence and feeling of uselessness. Will encourages him, telling him that he is already very brave, and offers to help him if he wants to become stronger. Rue shakes his hand and asks him to train him to be a brave warrior. After dinner, Will accompanies the dwarf back to his colony, where the other dwarves are worried about him. They are overprotective and tell Rue not to leave without warning, but Will intervenes and apologizes for keeping him busy. Suddenly, an old dwarf warrior named Gallus introduces himself, accepts the apology, and asks Will what he wants with Rooks. Will says that he wants to make Rue his helper, which makes the dwarves panic, as this would put the prince in danger. They pressure Rue to refuse, but Will says the choice should be his. Rooks gathers his courage and declares that he wants to serve the Paladin and become a brave warrior like his ancestors. Tired of being protected, he says he no longer wants to live like a coward. He kneels before Will and asks to be accepted as a servant. Will accepts his vow of loyalty. Will then turns to the dwarves and asks what they will do now that their prince has sworn loyalty to him. As everyone is confused, Gallus steps forward and accepts the decision, saying that each one must choose his own destiny. He gives Rue a final lecture on loyalty and sacrifice, assuring him that he will speak to Grendr later. Rooks is now an ally of Will. They discuss his salary. Rooks doesn't care much. But Will, remembering Gus's lesson that the world runs on money, decides to pay Rue a good salary, covering his upkeep and equipment. Later, when Will and Rooks are in the office, Rob returns from a trip and informs Will that he found nothing strange. He notices Rooks and corrects his posture, saying that he looks like a weakling with his hunched back. Rooks wants to learn from a true warrior, and Rob teaches him how to feign confidence even when he doesn't feel it. Time passes, and autumn brings a good harvest. There are no signs of calamities coming from the Rust Mountains, and Rooks has improved greatly with his training. One day, while he manages to knock Will to the ground with one of his techniques, Anna comes running with an urgent report. Undead have been sighted in the forest. Will decides to investigate personally and takes Rooks with him. The dwarf appears, fully equipped with his armor, and Will informs them that their destination is a place called Pillar Mound, to the west. When they arrive, a thick fog quickly envelops them. Will realizes that it is some kind of magical barrier. Soon, they reach the mound and observe wooden pillars rising frighteningly from the ground. Rooks spots a hooded figure and panics, but Will approaches and discovers that it is merely a wooden scarecrow, likely left to scare away grave robbers and protect the souls buried there. Rooks joins him, thinking that the undead are rising from the graves. Will explains that those who receive a proper burial do not become undead. Only those who die in the open or who maintain lasting ties with the living world receive the blessings of the god of the undead. He believes that Stagnate, while evil, is kind in his own way, offering eternal life, even if it causes trouble, for the living. Rooks then asks how Will knows so much about an evil god. Will looks away, realizing he has said too much. He decides that it is best to return home, concluding that the undead they saw were merely hallucinations caused by the mist. On the way back, they find a hidden gate that leads to a large tunnel. Will wields his spear and hands Rooks a torch. Inside the dark cave, they reach a chamber with several tombs. When Will tries to advance, an oppressive aura suffocates him. He calms down when he sees a raven emanating a sinister energy. He knows exactly who it is. The raven greets him, saying that it has been a long time since they have seen each other. Will recognizes Stagnate and asks what he is doing there. As he prepares to fight, Will is surprised. Stagnate claims that he is not there as an echo, but as a messenger. He says that he lost all his strength when he came to this world after his previous defeat, and that he will not be able to send another echo for many years. This appearance, according to him, is just bait to attract Will, a trap. However, Stagnate assures him that he does not want revenge. Above all, he wants to apologize. He explains that the echo Will faced was very young, and that sometimes these beings act irrationally and emotionally. In his last moments, he only wanted to apologize. Rooks is shocked to hear an evil god apologize. Stagnate explains that the destruction of his last echo was a night of intense pain and pleasure for him. Will asks him to get straight to the point, and the raven shows him a vision. Will sees a black dragon in his mind and falls to his knees, groaning in pain and shaking with fear. Stagnate reveals that Will soon face the evil dragon Valacerca, and that he will be defeated and die. He advises Will not to fight if he wants to survive, and suggests that he confirm everything with Gracefield if he does not trust him. Will, regaining his composure, asks why Stagnate is telling him this. The god replies that he likes humans, especially heroes, and Will is a hero to him. Stagnate says that he once faced Valacerca in the War of the Gods. Unlike other forces, the dragon was a monster that fought only for excitement and destruction. Even after the end of the war and the departure of the gods, Valacerca remained, acting as a mercenary. His last job was to attack the Iron Mountains at the behest of the High King of Demons. He conquered the mountain and exterminated the dwarves, but was seriously injured and had to sleep for 2 centuries. Rooks, surprised, asks more about his ancestors. Stagnate laughs at the irony and tells the descendant of the last king of the dwarves to be proud. His ancestor was a hero who tore out one of the dragon's eyes. Will doesn't quite believe that an evil god is being kind to him and Rooks, but Stagnate says that in time, Will be even greater than that king and will slay the dragon, but not yet. The ground shakes, and Stagnate warns. It's the roar of the dragon awakening. He warns Will to flee. Will and Rooks run back to Pillar Mound, now infested with demons. They fight together, with Will protecting the inexperienced Rooks. After defeating the enemies, the dragon's roar echoes again. Stagnate appears on one of the pillars and says that its roar can drive creatures mad with fear. It was what agitated the demons they just fought. Will's group arrives at the dead city's harbor, shrouded in thick fog. Will recognizes the powerful magic Gus, his former master, used to protect the city and ward off intruders. However, he knows the spell well and manages to decipher the magic key, opening the way for everyone to move forward. As Will steps foot back into his old home, he is overcome by nostalgia. Menel notices his hesitation and encourages him to continue, reminding him that now is the time to move on. As they advance, the companions notice the traces of destruction and the ancient enchantments that still resist. Will shares memories of the three heroes who raised him, Blood, Mary, and Gus, revealing to his friends the origin of his strength and faith. Menel is shocked to discover that Will had faced an echo of Stagnate as a child, and is irritated that he did not know this before, considering himself his best friend. The group heads to a hidden crypt, where Will had asked Antonio to leave supplies. There, they reveal sanctified enchanted weapons forged especially to face Valiziarca, the evil dragon. Each member receives equipment suited to their combat style. Menel receives arrows enchanted with light magic, perfect against the undead. Rue is given reinforced armor. Grizz is given an elemental spear, and Restov is given a magical sword inlaid with blessings. Will keeps his divine spear, a symbol of his faith and his mission as a paladin. The night before the battle, Will dreams of his goddess, Gracefeel. She appears before him tenderly, saying that she does not want him to die, but that she understands his decision. Will states that he must fight the dragon because his oath requires him to eliminate such a colossal evil. Gracefeel then blesses him again and promises to be by his side, no matter what happens. Will runs back home and, before doing anything else, pays a brief visit to his parents' grave. Then he goes to the temple in the hope of finding Gus again. However, his grandfather's ghost does not answer his calls. For a moment, Will fears that Gus has finally left this time. Sadly, he starts to turn to leave, when he is surprised by Gus, who appears only to scare him, as usual. Will is relieved and happy to see him, but the first question Gus asks is direct. "Did you make a lot of money?" Will is a little disappointed, but answers that he did not exactly. Still, he tells them that he has become a renowned paladin and the new lord of the Beastwood region. Gus is impressed by so many achievements, until he discovers that Will is still single and a virgin. The old ghost then shows disappointment and asks if he has at least had adventures with beautiful women during his journeys. Will replies, embarrassed, that he has only encountered men in his risky situations. Gus laughs out loud at the answer. Then, Will takes his friends to the temple and introduces everyone to Gus, explaining that they are there because they plan to face the dragon Valizarch. Gus's reaction is immediate. He becomes furious and calls Will an idiot for even thinking about fighting the evil dragon. He says that they don't even have the money to try to bribe Valizarch, and that there is no guarantee of victory in direct combat. Will's friends immediately realize where his obsession with economy and planning comes from. Clearly, he inherited it from Gus. Even so, Gus welcomes them well and begins to respect his grandson's companions. Grizz approaches and says that Gus, Blood, and Mary had saved his life in the past. Gus remembers him and says that he has aged well. Grizz thanks them for saving him and for raising such an incredible grandson. Later, Will visits his old room and is overcome by a strong sense of nostalgia. He then returns to talk to Gus and asks about Valizarch. Gus admits that he has never seen the dragon in person. If he had, he would have tried to negotiate with it instead of fighting it. Still, he gives some crucial advice. To defeat Valizarch, one must attack its old wounds because the dragon's scales are so hard that not even magic can easily pierce them. Furthermore, Valizarch is a dragon from the age of the gods, fast, huge, resilient, and cruel. No one has ever defeated it in direct combat. Will then understands why Stagnate tried to convince him to back down. Gus is surprised to hear the name of the god of death and thanks him for allowing him to raise such a great grandson. He then asks one last time if Will really wants to face the evil dragon, and Will answers firmly, he needs to defeat it. or many people will die after this. Dark conversation. Will changes the subject and recalls an old story, that of 3 heroes who saved a young half-elf girl and left her alone to help her in the future. He says that the half-elf still hopes that Gus will get the money back and asks if he can take the money now. Gus laughs and allows it, pleased with the memory, and says that there is something else even more valuable. He reveals that the equipment of the heroes who faced the High King is still hidden in the city. Gus takes the group to an abandoned workshop and shows a secret door that leads to an underground armory. Everyone is impressed by the legendary weapons and armor stored there. Will chooses a large, heavy shield, believing that it can protect him from the dragon's breath. Restov, on the other hand, prefers to keep his current sword, saying that what matters to him is its compatibility with the weapon. But he asks Gus to engrave magic words on it, to receive an extra blessing. Manel finds a legendary bow that had belonged to a famous elven warrior, and Gus realizes that Manel is of the same lineage as that hero. Grizz takes a sturdy dwarven armor and chooses a heavy halberd as his main weapon. Will then says a silent prayer for the ancient heroes who faced evil before him. He thanks them for the weapons, the opportunity, and the strength. Now, he feels it is his turn to protect the world. That's the end. If you liked it, comment "I want a cookie." Until next time, give a Chidori on the like and subscribe, and bye-bye.